I'm doing learning and teaching here. I'd just like to welcome you all. I know none of you are here to make an awful lot of money and get rich, are you? But to us, you're extremely important. So we're very grateful for you making the journey, and some of you have made the journey in some great weather conditions, and I've just hoped on the way home that this time possibly can be to us all. We view our external examiners as being key partners, really, and the university's adopted a position on enhancement, which is the most elusive concept, based upon Ben Elton's father. Remember Ben Elton? Yeah, Sir Lewis Elton, who said to me once, well, this enhancement thing is just about doing things better. It's just about constant improvement. It's about constantly wanting to keep an eye on things, make sure things are good, and always above a threshold of goodness, if you like. But doing better things is the stuff of application and integration of knowledge. Use of wisdom that's available to you, which is very much what's in the room here today. So we see you as a fantastic resource. In addition to doing that thing which is expected, this is about ratification of standards at the threshold level. And Tony Jansky, our Director of Quality Assurance and Enhancement, will take us on that journey for a little while. Whilst that's really important, we see our engagement with you and your engagement with the departments and those that we work with is very much a dialogue. One which is about advice, it's about criticality, and if you're anything like me, I'm still an external examiner. I learn a lot from doing it as well. We get ideas as well as share ideas. And so there is that kind of symbiosis, I've never said parasitism, symbiosis, I'm an old biologist originally. So we see you as part of the glue in joining things together. And one of the models that we share with all of our staff at induction is, it goes like this: learning, teaching, assessment, evaluation of all those things, so all of those components are constantly being improved. And facing towards that is your voice, which is about the application and integration of knowledge, support, challenge, helpfulness, as well as achieving the things that we have to achieve based upon codes of practice, etc., which Tony will share with us. So we very much categorise you as critical friends. We welcome you here. I'm sorry we're not making you rich with the fees, and I sympathise with that because the fees I get in other institutions are pretty similar, if not less actually. So for me, the point of view of national trends on external examining, these surveys that are done, this research that was done out of Oxford, Brooks, etc., which said that we might be moving towards an external examining database, etc. It's all fine and dandy. Where's the resource going to come from? That's the first thing. But I think one thing I recognise is the integrity and honesty and decency of external examiners, and long may that persist. So I think that's really important. What we will do today is take you on a bit of a journey which relates to our systems and expectations. We've got a colleague who will offer some additional advice and guidance about some specifics in addition to teacher training. We'll then give you an activity which is all about arousal, getting you aroused. Good word for Friday, eh? It's all about trying to get you in the zone by looking at some examples of reports which will raise a dialogue. Reports are almost irrelevant, it's the dialogue, it's the questions, it's the sightlines, it's the processes and ideas that will emerge that are most important. And that'll be followed by question and answer, etc. And the opportunity to go and have some lunch and copious amounts of wine. Is that correct? No, that's not true either. But then the opportunity to go into the departments and areas and work with colleagues to burrow down into specifics. So just on behalf of the university, I'd like to welcome you. Thank you very much. I hope we can continue in that critical friend mode. I do recognise some people are coming back to support us annually. We really value that too. So without further ado, can I hand over to my colleague, Tony?
Thank you, Mark. Good morning, everybody. In lieu of a welcome slide, we put our external examiner webpage up on the screen for you. This is a very useful resource, which I'm sure you will use. And if you've been an external examiner with us for a while, I'm sure you have used this quite a lot. And this is where we basically signpost our regulations and also provide access to the templates that you'll be using to report. And we've moved now to an online reporting system. A bit late in the day, I think, compared with others in the sector, but we're there now, and it's working really well. And I hope that you find that that is actually a really useful and user-friendly way of submitting your annual reports. Can I just check before I start my 15 minutes? Let's just get a sense of who's in the room here. Who hasn't been an external before at all? Right, okay, so we've got some people who've got no experience but have seen it presumably from the side of the academic who's bringing externals in, okay. So other colleagues in the room have been an external at least once before for other institutions. Who's externaling for teacher training programs? Anybody? Right, okay. Great, and sorry, just remind me, have you all done that before, or are there any novices? One novice. Okay, right, that's great, really helpful. 15 minutes is what I've been given. I'm not very good at sticking to time, but I'll do my best. Before I kick in, let me just say that it's not just me and Mark talking at you this morning. We've also got Helen Smallbone, who's our academic registrar. And after Mark and I have done our bit, and you've had a chance to do a bit of table work, Helen's going to talk about the regulations. Now, I'm one of those odd people that actually finds regulations interesting. And I like listening to Helen talk about them because she has a real passion for this sort of thing. So if you're not, particularly switched on by regs, don't worry, we're going to make it as interesting for you as we possibly can. There you go. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you've got to live up to this now. Okay, the role of the external examiner. What I'm going to do, first of all, is just talk about the national expectations, because Edgehill is not operating in a glorious vacuum here. There are certain things that we have to do because we are told to do them, and we're told to do them by QAA. So there are certain things that we have to make sure you do in order for us to satisfy QAA that we are meeting their expectations. And then there are certain operational things that maybe are distinctive to Edgehill. So it's not so much what you do, but how you do it. And those are the things I'd also like to signpost for you, because they may be different, subtly, from the way in which the external examiner role is operationalised elsewhere and as you've experienced it elsewhere. But they will be subtle differences because we are all working to the same template. Okay, context. The first thing to say is that external examiners are fairly unique to this part of the world. If you go to other places, particularly America, for example, the teacher is king, the lecturer, the professor, sets the assignments, marks the assignments, awards the grades, and that's the end of it all. This sort of notion of external moderation doesn't figure. It's been really, I think, a defining characteristic of quality assurance in the UK. But of course, it is just one part of quality assurance. And as far as our quality strategy is concerned, it is, if you like, a feature, a subset of our annual monitoring process. So the reports that you produce or will produce will feed into a bigger activity that we conduct once a year, which is around reflecting on the performance of programs from the previous cycle, drawing significances from that, addressing specifics which pertain to the programs that you're examining, but also distilling from your reports generic, recurring issues, observations that perhaps will help us to refine the way in which our external examiner system operates across the board, across programs. So although you're reporting at program level, things you're telling us in your reports actually have an influence more widely on the way in which external examining operates in Edgehill. So that's I think something that's important to put out there. There's a timeline on the next couple of slides. Deering features there because there were explicit references in the Deering report to strengthening the external examiner system with a particular emphasis on induction and training, hence why we're here today. That was followed up shortly afterwards by QAA issuing the first of its chapters of the old Code of Practice on external examining, Section 4, for those of us who've been around for a while. And then a little bit later, the politicians began to get involved. And I don't know if you know this story, I always tell it, so forgive me if you've heard it before, of the Parliamentary Select Committee back in, whenever it was, 2008, where the committee had two vice-chancellors sitting in front of them. One was from Oxford University, and the other one was from Oxford Brookes University. So that was cleverly engineered, wasn't it? And question to the VCs, how do you know that a first-class degree from your university is worth the same as a first-class degree from your university? And to cut a long story short, the VCs couldn't answer the question. They sort of went all around the houses, they waffled, they floundered, and at the end of the day, actually, there is a very simple answer to that question. They're not. And they don't purport to be. What we do have to show, and the quality code is where we're told this, is that we must all be equivalent at what's called threshold standard. So none of us should be awarding a degree in X anywhere in the country unless our programs and the standards being achieved by students at least meet that minimum national threshold. Beyond that threshold, as autonomous institutions, we are free to decide how we grade, how we classify, whether we use credit. There are still one or two institutions in the country that don't use credit, and the quality code allows for that. So understanding what the national expectations are is actually quite important. Now, having said that, I'm sure you're all plugged into recent debates around the Green Paper and changes to national quality assessment, where, in fact, pressure is being brought to bear again to try to harmonise standards beyond threshold. And the politicians are saying, well, it's all very well to say, well, you're equal at threshold, but what about 2.2? And what about 2.1? And why can't you be equal at those levels as well? So there is now an agenda which is being promoted to not just harmonise at the threshold level, but also at the higher levels of classification, and indeed to replace classification altogether with something called grade point average, which I'm sure some of you have heard of, whose main virtue is that it replaces a very narrow scale of third class 2.2, 2.1 first with something like a 16-point scale. Yep. So provides greater granularity and eliminates the so-called cliff edge between a 2.1 and a 2.2, where one mark can make the difference, that all-important difference. But GPA is nothing to do with standards. It's just a measuring device. That's all it is. And if anybody says to you, oh, GPA, yeah, that's really going to help us to drive standards, put them straight. It's got nothing to do with standards. It's to do with recording achievement. Okay, so that Parliamentary Select Committee kicked off quite a lot of activity. Universities UK and Guild HE were told to go away and do some work on this. They came back and said that, broadly speaking, the system worked, but there was potential to beef it up a little bit, particularly around the training side. And then QAA came up with a reiteration of its code of practice, this time under the banner of the new UK Quality Code, Chapter B7, first chapter of that new code. And where are we now? Well, additional research has been done. I don't know if you've seen it. HEA research, I think Oxford, Brookes and Cumbria did some work, where they got a group of external examiners in a subject area to blind mark the same piece of work. And yeah, I'm seeing nods, so you know what the outcome of that was. Grades all over the shop. So again, revisiting this notion of, is the external examiner system fit for purpose? It is in the HEFKE proposals for changing quality assurance. As you probably know, they've revived the suggestion that there should be a national register of examiners, independent of institutions, from which institutions would draw, and also that that national system should embody all the training that external examiners undertake. That didn't get a particularly warm reception from the sector in its response to the consultation, and I think HEFKE realises that there's some work to do on that. So whether we'll see a register, or when we'll see it, I think is open to question. What I would say to you, though, and I think we said this in our response, really, the training of external examiners is not the right place to focus your efforts. If you're going to improve understanding of standards, you improve it within institutions. Because where do external examiners come from? They come from institutions. Who are external examiners? There are internal moderators. If they're not externally examining competently, the chances are they're not internally assessing competently. So my view, for what it's worth, is channel your resource where it's going to be most effective, where you get the maximum impact. And perhaps we, as a sector, should be doing more in-house to ensure that our assessors understand the importance of national reference points, both generically and subject specifically. Okay, so let's await the outcomes of all those deliberations, and let's now talk more generally about where we're at now. In addition to training and support, what were the other things that exercised the politicians? Well, transparency. What is this role? Mark used the word critical friend. What's the balance between the critical friend, advisor, helper, supporter part of the role and the inspectorial part of the role? Because at the end of the day, you are a judge. You're judging standards, but you're also there to offer helpful advice and support. So how does that balance work? How do we avoid the criticism that the relationship is too close, too cosy? Clarification of powers. What can external examiners actually do? Can you say those marks must be changed, or can't you? What is the extent of your authority? And also, we talk about standards all the time, quality and standards. What about enhancement? What role do you have? Where do you figure in the way in which we identify good practice and seek to disseminate it more widely within the institution? So those were other things that I think were being thought about when those discussions were being had. So the National Quality Code, Chapter B7, has this expectation sitting at the top, which is very top level. Higher education providers make scrupulous use of external examiners. Doesn't really say anything, does it? I mean, it's motherhood and apple pie. Why would we not make scrupulous use of external examiners? So for the detail, we've got to look a little bit deeper, and we have these things called indicators of sound practice, which actually provide the nitty-gritty for us. What is it that you are expected to do and we are required to ensure that you do? And the first one is around standards. An institution is maintaining the academic threshold standards set for that degree when it was validated. So we're asking you in your reports to tell us from your experience and your understanding and knowledge of the national level framework and the national subject benchmark statement for your area, using those as reference points, can you confidently tell us that our degree is still meeting that national minimum threshold? Okay. If it's not, that is something that we're going to take extremely seriously. And we are going to leap into action in order to make sure that we address that. Because what we are actually saying to us is we're awarding degrees that aren't worth the paper they're written on. And there is no way that Edge Hill is going to be put in that position. So that judgment on threshold standards is absolutely key. But we're also asking you to comment on comparability as well. And that's the beyond threshold bit. Are our 2-1s and 2-2s broadly of the same standard as the ones that you award in your institutions, in your subjects? Now there, if you tell us they're not, you might be saying we're a bit generous or a bit mean. That is certainly something we're going to take on board. But we're not going to be as exercised by that as we are if you tell us we're not hitting the threshold. Is that reasonably clear? And we're obviously asking you to endorse our assessment processes and the way in which they operate in respect of fairness and in respect of rigour. There's the enhancement bit where we ask you, we invite you to tell us if there's anything that you've gleaned from looking at coursework and the way in which it's been assessed that is particularly innovative, distinctive, or just effective in your experience. We'd like to know that, not just to commend the originators, but because we might just be able to transfer that good practice into other areas. And that's part of our enhancement agenda. Opportunities to enhance quality. The annual report, well, I think that you obviously know about that. You wouldn't apply to be an external examiner unless you knew that once a year you're going to have to produce that summative assessment. And what does the report do? It confirms a number of things that are I would class under the heading of administrative. Did you get the support you needed to be able to externally moderate the work? Did you get samples? Did you get them in good time in order to inform the assessment process? Very important that you get all those materials, assignment briefs, marks profiles, all the things that enable you to make those judgments about the appropriateness of the assessment. Where you've raised comments in previous reports, have they been addressed? That doesn't mean have they been addressed to your satisfaction necessarily, have they all been responded to with a yes, but have they at least been responded to? Is there evidence that the course team has taken seriously the things you've said, even if at the end of the day some of them they may agree to differ with you on? We need to know that. Some programs are PSRB regulated. We have 2 faculties here where a large amount of provision is PSRB regulated. So we're asking you, if you like, to look through 2 different lenses there, the academic and also the professional. And although your role is principally academic, and the judgments you're making are against national academic reference points, we are interested to know if there is any misalignment or drift that you've perceived away from teacher training standards, nurse training standards, or whatever it may be. And at the very end of your 3 years, 4 years, can't remember, 3 years, 4 years? 3 years. 4 years, thank you. You tell us what it was like. You know. How did it work for you? How do you feel your contribution supported the university's quality assurance? Are there any messages, any suggestions that you want us to take away and look at? So that's the form. Of course, it's not just a once-a-year activity. It's not just coming in, you know, in March, April, whatever it is, May, and looking at coursework. There are things that you're going to have to do in year. So, for example, approving exam papers and other assessment materials like coursework briefs. What we say in our handbook at the moment is that all exam papers beyond level 5 must be approved by the external examiner before they're used. As far as other assessment materials concerned, that's a matter for negotiation between your department here, your subject colleagues, and yourselves, what you want to see. We don't mandate that every single assignment brief must be passed by you before it's used. Now, there is a discussion going on in the university about whether we need to reinforce that, but at the moment that's where things stand. And it may be that particularly at level 6, course teams will feel that it's particularly useful to get your feedback on the assignment specifications that they plan to use. You come in and moderate, and then when you attend assessment boards, you're in a position to be able to comment, hopefully favourably, on the way in which that whole process of internal and external moderation has worked. So you're looking at the way in which the marking within Edge Hill has been conducted, evidence of internal moderation before it gets to you to externally moderate. And everything is being tested against our academic regulations. It's important to maybe dwell on that for a moment, because sometimes we get comments from external examiners where it makes it pretty clear they're not actually measuring us against our regs, they're measuring us against their own regs. And saying, well, you shouldn't be doing that. I mean, why are you classifying that way? Actually, although we're quite interested to hear your thoughts about our assessment regulations, at the end of the day, your role is to tell us that we are following our own regulations and procedures. Okay. And if you don't always like them, well, maybe there's an opportunity for you to tell us. But just remember that that's not your role. Your role is to measure us against ourselves. Exceptionally, very exceptionally, you might be asked to arbitrate on borderline cases. That question I raised earlier, the obvious one, can external examiners change marks? The answer here, at any rate, is no. No, they can't. But if in your external moderation you perceive serious issues in relation to the way in which marking has taken place, you can strongly advise us to remark, to remoderate, possibly to scale marks, where perhaps the relationship between the grades is okay. It's just the fact that they need moving up or down a bit. But what we don't allow our external examiners to do is say you must change that 58 to a 60. Okay. Technical things like deadlines for reports. During the year, we have this process called modifications, minor and major modifications. It's the way in which we keep our curricula up to date, because we don't, in most cases, have a revalidation process at Edge Hill. We have periodic review, which renews programs, but usually on the evidence that modifications have been used constructively during the 5 years preceding to keep that curriculum alive and make sure that the standards haven't drifted. When course teams propose changes to modules or changes to assessment, they will occasionally come to you. If they are sufficiently significant to require your approval. So please be prepared to get emails from time to time saying, could you please look at this revised module assessment, or could you please look at this new module, and just provide a few lines of endorsement or critique. That's really helpful to us. So more on administration. Did everything work to your satisfaction? Did you get what you needed? Did you get the responses? This is the report form. Now, you've got one of these in your packs. And we're going to ask you to look at a specimen report in a moment that we've anonymised and just critique it amongst yourselves and then feed back to us. But this is the online template. So I'm not going to dwell on it, but you can see there's a lot of emphasis on fairness and equity of assessment, standard of marking, and some specific references to things like work-based learning. Those of you who are on QTS programs, there is one additional responsibility that you have that none of the other colleagues in the room will have to undertake, and that is school visits. Because we require our QTS examiners to go into schools and observe teaching. That's unique to QTS programs. It doesn't happen on any other programs, even those that involve work-based learning or practice learning. On the page of the report here, I've put this bit in red because it's the bit about standards that I was referring to earlier. Are the standards of the programme appropriate and are students achieving them? That's a very, very bland question, and we're actually changing that for this year. So when you see the template, it will make very specific reference to national reference points. It will say not are the standards appropriate, but are they aligned with the Framework for Higher Education Qualifications level descriptors and the appropriate subject benchmarks. So if you like, we're focusing you very much on measuring us against national expectations, and then comparability, which we're also very keen to hear about. So I have overrun, I said I would, and we're going into a workshop activity now, and Mark's just going to lead us into that.